just a reminder also while we're waiting on GovTV, bring your participant list up right in your screen so that you can raise your hand if you have a question or want to interject. It's sometimes a little hard to see it unless you're really vigorously waving, but we'll try to keep you up, and I'll do my best to call out the names as I see them. So, great. Thank you, sir. Good evening, folks. It's June 1st, 2020, and welcome to the 11th meeting of the 24th City Council. Tonight, all councilors are present, along with guests from the administration that were present via our Zoom video conference. As we do for each of our city council meetings, we'll begin our meeting tonight with a moment of silence, followed by the pledge in English and Spanish. Councilor Benton is going to lead us in the pledge in Spanish, and I'll lead us in the pledge in English tonight. Before we begin, we'll ask that you take a moment of silence. And tonight, we want to think about all those that we're thinking about, including the family of George Floyd and others who've been raised and their situation and their families raised to the public consciousness this week as a result of the protest and the tragic loss of life in Minneapolis and around the country. So take a moment for a moment of silence, and we'll return to our pledge. Thank you all, and if you'll join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Councilor Benton, would you lead us in the pledge from Spanish, please?
Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y a la república que representa, una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos.
Thank you, Councilor, and thank you to everybody for participating and helping us tonight. A few housekeeping notes off the top this evening. As was noted in our press release from our office on Friday and as well on our website, and noted in our published agenda, tonight's meeting continues our special emergency procedures given the governor's declaration of a public health emergency and a ban on gatherings of more than 5 people. Therefore, tonight's meeting is being held by Zoom video conference. Members of the public, critical city staff, and the media, and any city staff have the ability to view our meetings through 3 different platforms. On GovTV, on Comcast Channel 16, the GovTV website, and live on YouTube. These live streams can be accessed from most any smartphone or tablet or computer. And for those watching on a live stream, we want to thank you for joining us tonight. A video recording of this meeting and all of our city council meetings are available for viewing at any time on our website. And our staff is available via telephone if members of the public need assistance in finding those videos. You can contact our office at 768-3100 for assistance anytime during our business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. The council accepted general public comment and comment on tonight's specific agenda items in written form via email and web form through 4 p.m. today. Those comments were distributed to all councilors, and we'll discuss some of them in our deliberations and comments tonight. If the meeting does extend to 7 o'clock or so, we'll do our best to take a short break at about 7 o'clock this evening to let everybody get up, stretch their legs, and get ready for the next section of our agenda. So for those of you following along, if we get to 7 o'clock, we'll look for a good place to do that. We would normally do proclamations, presentations, and economic development discussions, but we have none of those scheduled tonight. So this evening, we'll start with administration Q&A. We have a guest, Lieutenant Del Greco from APD is here and available, and I know councilors have some specific questions for APD about the events of the last few days. And so what we've done tonight is ask for councilors to with questions for APD to do those off the top. And so we'll do that, and then we'll be able to excuse APD to go back to some other activities for the evening. And then we'll talk about some other departments. And so to get us started, I want to defer to Councilor Sena. I believe you have some questions for Lieutenant Del Greco.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Given the current public health emergency and the sensitivity of the respiratory system, is tear gas the best practice to disperse crowds? Are there better methods and considerations without utilizing excessive force?
Sure. Council President Davis, Councilor Sena, thank you for the question. So to start off the top, tear gas, we've kind of evolved as a law enforcement community from using tear gas to use other forms of what we call a chemical irritant. One of the forms that we use is an OC vapor. So it's actually, to get technical and get into the weeds with you all, it's called oleoresin capsicum, which is essentially the active ingredient in chili peppers. So it's food grade. You can put it on your meal if you'd like. But the use of the chemical deterrent is a way for law enforcement to create distance between law enforcement officers and the public. And kind of in the spectrum of using those types of options, that's pretty far on the end of it. So we go through a lot of options before we get there. So we go through things like officer presence. So I use the example typically of when you're driving on the freeway and you see a police officer behind you, your first reaction to that is to slow down. And the officer isn't doing anything other than probably trying to get to work just like you all are. But you see the police officer and just his presence alone changes your behavior. And law enforcement is cognizant of that, and we utilize that to our advantage at times. We move on to, we have elements within the Albuquerque Police Department that are plainclothes, where they're detectives. They drive unmarked police vehicles, and they provide intelligence to us in a manner that a marked law enforcement officer is unable to, because again, when a law enforcement officer comes into an area, they change the behavior of that area. So they're able to give us intelligence and verify information or not verify information based on their observations. We use public address announcements. So when we come into a crowd, and there's significant difference between what you saw yesterday afternoon and I just lost my train. I'm sorry. Working on about 2 hours of sleep today. So working the protester, it wasn't a protest, it was a peaceful march. Peaceful march. Thank you, Lawrence. So there was a significant difference between the peaceful march, which had about 2,000 people. It was a significant event. And the Geyer administration protects those people's rights to exercise their constitutional rights. That was in sharp contrast to the group that came out yesterday late last night. And so when groups like that pass the point of civil disobedience, i.e. destruction of property or harming officers or others, that's when those chemical agents are used. And again, they're used to create distance. One of the kind of key functions of those chemical munitions is once you are out of the environment where the chemical munition is in, you no longer are susceptible to its effects. So it doesn't last with you a long period of time. Like if you were to be pepper sprayed, which if you ever get the opportunity to join the police department, you get to go through, which is quite unpleasant. But that is a very long-lasting effect. And one of the fun things about that is when you get it and then it kind of goes away, but then when you go home and get in the shower, your pores open up from the heat of the shower and it reactivates that pepper spray. So it stays with you for a couple of days. The chemical munitions that we use during those events like we did last night are not effective like that. They don't last with the individual for any long period of time. So those are kind of some of the reasons as to why we use those chemical agents, because they're not as effective as other forms and they're a lot less invasive on the individual as, say, a taser or any other forms of less lethal munitions that we have at our disposal. So another thing, as far as the excessive force, that's a very it's a very situational deal. And I use the example of that, Councilor Sena, if we were to deploy chemical munitions on the individual last night, you all are aware that we had an individual that was barricaded in an apartment that was firing multiple rounds from an AK-47 out into the community. If we were to use chemical munitions on that individual, it's a very low-level use of force in relation to the severity and potential of death or great bodily harm that individual was exhibiting. On contrast, or the other side of the coin to that, if we were to use less lethal chemical munitions, such as the OC vapor, on an individual that was just crossing the sidewalk or what we would commonly call jaywalking, that would be an excessive use of force. So because of the severity of the crime, which is a very low-level crime that we all would agree. There's no threat to the officer or others. There's no damage to property. But that chemical munition is a very high level of a force option used on a very low-level crime or threat. So the excessive force is a very specific situational kind of component that I would have to look at individually to determine whether or not any of the deploying of a chemical munition was excessive or not. I'm sorry if that answered your question, Councilor Center, or not.
Councilor Sen.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate coming here on only 2 hours of sleep. But I think it's really important that the public and our constituents know what's being utilized at this moment, because of course, as we know, that the virus has an impact on our respiratory systems, and I'm just wanting to know and making sure that if it is required, if it's whether it's these the chemical that you're referring to, and just what implications that can bring if the public is exposed to it. I know that you touched on this other question that I have briefly, but what are the policies for de-escalation, especially during a protest?
Sure, Councilor Davis, Councilor Senate, thank you. So our policies are kind of what I alluded to earlier. We start at the lowest level possible, and I think that that's what the community saw in the march earlier in the evening. They saw a police presence, right, and that was on the periphery of the march. We were blocking traffic. We blocked about a 4-block radius around the march to protect those people marching from vehicular traffic. We shut down the freeway just to ensure that any individuals that were marching weren't in harm's way. So that's the lowest level. And for the most part, a vast majority of the people that were marching didn't see APD because it wasn't required and it wasn't needed. We were protecting their First Amendment rights on the outside without anyone in the march ever really seeing us. And then obviously as the night wore on and that group of peaceful marchers left, a new group came in, and they started with damage. They were lighting things on fire. They were throwing rocks, bottles, skateboards, shopping carts, basically anything that wasn't bolted down. They were getting thrown at windows or officers or what have you. And based on that behavior, that's what kind of ramps it up. And we don't automatically just ramp it up. We started again with officer presence. We had an undercover element in the area to give us real-time data that we can rely on. And then we come out with announcements. So we give those individuals that are conducting that behavior an opportunity to vacate the area. So they don't have to stay. So they're staying at their own accord. We're not keeping them there. We would much rather them all go home and not conduct that kind of behavior, or at least just stop that behavior altogether. And then those chemical munitions aren't used. And if that behavior continues and the threat to the officer or others doesn't cease, or the property damage doesn't stop occurring, then after all other options are exhausted, we're forced to deploy those munitions. And that's a standard, a best practice throughout the country to disperse the crowd.
Councilor Senate, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just one more question. So in thinking of this, I know that you're telling me that it really varies situationally, and as things progress, so does the response to that. But I'm just thinking of the standard protocols. Like, do all the protest protocols include police force in riot gear, meaning like the emergency response team? Do you guys always have them on the side, or what does it typically entail?
Sure, Councilor Davis, Councilor Senate, thank you for the question. So it's complex. So it just depends on a number of factors that we use within the police department that I don't really want to get into the weeds on. But based on the crowd, the size of the crowd, a multitude of factors, where they're demonstrating, all of those types of things kind of leads us to build a force that is kind of in step with protecting the community and the protesters. So if it's a small crowd, like we frequently have crowds outside of different businesses, whether it be a union dispute or other types of protests, that doesn't elicit a response from the Albuquerque Police Department at all. And then we have other crowds that we do some things and others. So it's, again, it's situationally. I will tell you that Chief Geyer and the administration are very well aware that when the deployment of an officer in full riot gear is that decision is made, it's a very intrusive one. And the visual effect on those people in that area is significant. So we only deploy those assets as necessary. So as an example, we had people were damaging the Triangle Sub last night. There was a female that came out of the crowd and started yelling at these two kids that were throwing rocks at the Triangle Sub, and they took off. Well, if we had officers en route to protect that property, but because those people left the area, we knew that once those officers got on scene and stood in front of the Triangle Sub, it would elicit a response that we didn't want. And it would agitate the crowd. And so we pulled that asset back and we ended up not deploying it. So we're very well aware of the visual kind of how it's visually, it's attractive. Sorry, I'm trying to loosen myself here, but we're very well aware of what police and riot gear does to people, and we only deploy it as a last resort. Sorry, Councilor.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And just to follow up, I would love to hear more details, and I know I don't want to hold you for too long, but just thinking of the considerations that are being made, I would love to follow up on that, because I'm thinking, what's the difference in response to, say, the Women's March compared to the march that occurred Thursday or yesterday? So in contrasting those two, what was the deciding factor? Was it size or where they were protesting? So if you can go into that.
Sure. Councilor Davis, Councilor Sen, absolutely. If you'd like to set up a meeting, I'd be more than happy to go through those. We have a matrix and all kinds of stuff that we do to use to plan.
Thank you, Councilor. Is that all?
That is all for now, but I would love to follow up to get more details on that. And I think it's really important that the public is aware of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I think those are great questions. I have a couple myself, but before we do, I see Councilor Benton has his hand raised, so I'll call him next. And as a reminder, councilors, if you have any other questions for APD, use the raise your hand function. We'll put you in line. And so we'll go to Councilor Benton and then recognize myself if we don't have any others. Councilor.
Thank you, President Davis. Lieutenant Greco, a couple of quick questions. I'll try to make it fast here. Basically, in response to emails I'm getting, sort of as we speak. One is a concern about Old Town. Old Town, of course, is older buildings, generally not any fire protection. I understand why they would be concerned. Is there, and then for West Downtown, some of the property owners along Central West Downtown have also asked, is there a contingency plan if the protests are damaging property, as was done last night, and they are moved out of downtown? Is there a backup plan for West Downtown and Old Town?
Council President Davis, Councilor Benton. Yes, so we have contingency plans. I don't really want to get into the weeds as far as that's concerned to divulge any kind of proprietary information. However, I will tell you that we have some fundamental rules that we follow that kind of guide us in these incidents. And we are working with Rio Rancho Police Department, New Mexico State Police, the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department, APD, U.S. Marshal Service, Homeland Security, FBI, to provide the public for the city of Albuquerque the best services possible. So we have contingencies in place for all of those things. Obviously, we'll implement them if needed, and Lord knows I hope that we don't need them at all.
Mr. President, and thank you for that. And yeah, definitely not asking for details, just putting that out there. I'm sure, you know, it's obviously a very it's a situation in flux, and you're going to strategically deal with it as best you can. And I know that you'll try your best. I was really sorry to hear about Silver Street Market last night. I mean, a business that's really stepped up in our community and invested in downtown when no one else would, and struggles daily with issues, just the dynamics of being downtown. But I was really sorry to hear about that. And there has to be a balance struck, you know, and I am very much on the side of the peaceful protesters. And I know that APD is, for that matter, as expressed by Chief Dyer. But we can't tolerate, you know, endangerment of people's property and their whole life's investments in some cases, and then places like the chemo theater. I mean, if we were to lose that, that would be something would just be a real hole in our hearts as a community. So I know you'll try your best to strike a balance, and that there would not be any kind of unnecessary use of force against protesters, but fully support use of force if people are abusing their rights for free expression.
And Mr. President and Councilor Benton, if I might add to Lieutenant Del Greco's comments, we also are coordinating very closely with the Albuquerque Fire Department, and particularly as you look at the two areas that have a historical base in the city, and your district in particular, and where most of the activity has transpired here recently. Both Old Town and West Downtown, we have our fire department on alert to be able to respond at a moment's notice with a close coordination with APD. I would also just add to all of you that, again, we're happy to sit with you and talk to you a little bit about these protocols that the lieutenant tried to describe to you tonight. It's very important that you all know that our administration has taken the approach that the peaceful protests, we will support and encourage those to occur. We will use our police department to ensure that the protesters are safe, so that we don't have any incidents with maybe traffic, in particular with an incident we saw in other part of the country where you have a big motorized vehicle coming into a crowd. And that's a lot of what happened yesterday. The mayor and I were both at this event earlier in the afternoon and watched that. And APD did a great job in managing the event and watching the peaceful protest, if you will, the march down to downtown. But as the lieutenant said, certain circumstances transpired through the course of the evening that created a situation where there was a real strong concern about destruction of public property or private property for that matter, and also concerns for the safety of some of the folks that were part of the protest or may not have been, but may be innocent bystanders as well as the neighborhoods. So all of those factors come into play, but for Councilor Sena and for the rest of the councilors, we'd be happy to have a little briefing with each one of you to give you a little bit of a sense of what it means to make these decisions and what kind of situations trigger certain responses as we see through the course of an event. I would also say that, look, the coordination with as many agencies as the lieutenant described is also critical, to have as many of those resources available to help us ensure that we're getting all the best information that we can to make good decisions, all really in the name of ensuring that people are safe, that the community is safe, and that the disruption to the private businesses and the community is as minimal as possible. And so I want to just make sure that you all are aware of that and be happy to visit with you as the week progresses.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Real. Councilor Jones and then myself. Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for letting me butt in front of you there. But I do have a major question for Mr. Real, I assume. So we're very concerned about the protesters and their safety and what's happening to them, although they did make the choice to go there. No one forced them to. And I understand we evolved into something far, far greater and worse than we had anticipated. But my question to Mr. Rael and the administration, whoever would like to respond to this, is how about those business people who did not choose to riot, did not choose to cause problems, but now there's a large number of them, whose properties are in bad shape. Most of the windows on the ground floors have been knocked out in a number of the properties. They've been spray painted, graffiti, spray painted. I think this is a multi-block area and multi-buildings, and I don't have a count on that. And now we face a situation, and to include the Chemo Theater, of course, which was very close to being burned down. I understand our concern about the people who were involved and their safety, but how about the illegal acts that they were participating in and causing to happen? How about the people now who have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to their properties and their businesses, and the continued shutdown of their businesses because of not only the outside, the exterior damage, but also the interior damage that was caused by the looting, probably not as much of that, but certainly the glass and the issues with the property. So what, Mr. Rael, are we planning to do to help those people who did not perpetrate illegal actions, and yet now they are faced with the cost of fixing what was happening there by people who were breaking the law?
Mr. President and Councilor Jones and the councilors, Councilor Jones, make a very good point, and that is part of the decision-making process that APD undertakes as they make decisions about what type of response to a given situation. There is no question about the fact that our local businesses that have invested their time, their energy, their own money into establishing their businesses are severely impacted whenever we have a situation like this that causes damage to their place of business, and as a result sets them back. Part of our conversation today with the community was about the fact that we have a 1-2 punch, so to speak. We've had the Corona issues and the fact that these businesses have been closed for some time, and just when they're about to open, now we have the situation that evolved last night that created an even bigger impact to those businesses. For the short term, we have obviously stepped up, and this morning the mayor announced that we would help those businesses board up their windows with city dollars, or if you will, with the federal funds that we'll have available to help protect those businesses. And a lot of those businesses along Central took us up on the offer, and we've boarded many of the windows, just to help those businesses, at least through the moment and through the next couple of days as we see these issues progress. We're also going to reach out to them with our small business group to begin to have conversations about how we might be able to help get some of those damages and some of that work or some of that, if you will, damage repaired in their businesses. But you're right. Those are the kinds of the balancing act that we take between human life, protesters and others in the community, and the businesses that have an investment that is longstanding and that we want to make sure we continue to bolster so that they can continue to prosper. But we'll be reaching out to all those businesses and see how we can help with whatever programs we can come up with to help them with the costs that they're obviously going to have to endure during this period.
Councilor Jones with a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Rael, I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't come quickly enough for the people who have been damaged. When what and how are we going to do this? Because we now have a situation not only, and people think, well, it's those rich people who own all those buildings and so they can afford to do this, but it's also their employees who are once again not able to go to work in a building, in some of these buildings that are so damaged. So what is the time frame? When can they expect? I've had several call me. When can they expect to get a call from the city? And how quickly do you think we can act to get them back open for business and their properties in repair in a situation that they can again conduct business there?
Mr. President and Councilor Jones, I can assure that they were contacted today as it relates to boarding up their businesses and helping them at least protect them through the course of whatever happens this evening going forward. Our small business office will be in touch with all of those businesses as early as tomorrow again to determine what transpires this evening and to see how we can help. I'd love to be able to tell you this and this and this at this very moment, but as you know, these protests are going to continue, and we don't know, in essence, what the impact of each of those protests are going to be. But we are mindful of your concern. We're trying to do what we can to at least help them protect what they have today, and we'll continue to work with them over the next week or so to give them any kind of assistance that we can bolster, if you will, in the community.
Councilor Jones, did that conclude your comments or your questions?
One more, please.
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Rao, I appreciate what you said about contacting the property owners, the businesses, but I think the delivery in some of the instances wasn't quite as it could have been. I heard from a couple of people that they were told they needed to board their businesses up immediately, their windows up immediately. If they didn't, they would be fined. Seems backwards to me, Mr. Rao. I don't believe anyone has been fined or going to be charged and come up with financial help for the people who were harmed, and yet we are threatening the harmed people with fines. And let me tell you, it's not easy to find enough people to go board up these windows and clean up the glass. So I'm appalled at what's happened and the fact that we're knowing that it's probably going to happen again tonight. So thank you, Mr. Rael, for serving.
Thank you, Mr. President and Councilor Jones. I mean, I just ask you that if you could forward those businesses, that information to me, I will ensure you that we will get someone out there, because that is not the message that we are wanting to send to those businesses. At least we want not finding them for not covering their windows. As a matter of fact, our whole intent was, if you can't do the work yourself, let us know, and we will have a city contractor come out and help you with that. So please let me know who they are, and we will make sure we contact them immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Rael. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Councilors, I see Councilor Pena has a question. I have one as well, but I want to be sure if there are any other questions for Lieutenant Del Greco specifically at APD, I want to be sure we take them, and then we can go back to some of the more general response. So I'll go to Councilor Pena first if you have a question for Lieutenant Del Greco. Otherwise, I don't, and so we'll let him leave and get back to the administration. But Councilor Pena?
I'm good. I must have inadvertently hit the raise hand button, but I just want to say that, I think that APD has done, just such a great job just over the years working so closely with APD in terms of what they're trying to do out there in the community. As a result of what happened in the past, I think we've come a long way. What happened to Mr. Floyd it's just devastating. My heart goes out to the family. I know people are seeking justice and people are tired for what's been happening in our community throughout the city and obviously throughout the nation. We have other countries who are just joining in with this, so it is just devastating to see what's happening. And I just hope that if the administration has any contact with some of the organizers, that they really have a conversation about what our city means to us and how far we've come, and I would wish that some of the businesses out there would post out there that they understand the plight of the people and why they're out there protesting, and maybe post something on their businesses saying that Black Lives Matter,
Counselor Pena, I'm going to pause you just a second. Counselor Pena, if you can hear us, I think we lost your microphone. If you could reset it for on your side. Counselor Pena, if you could, we lost you for about the last 10 seconds or so. If you could reset your microphone on your side, we want to get the end of your comment. Not yet. I think it's just that F8 button again. But okay. And now, Counselor, if you can unmute yourself, Julian's going to unmute you here and we'll try you one more time. Counselor, we're going to let Julian work with you really quickly to get your mic back. We only lost about the last 10 seconds, but I want to be sure we get to let you close that because it was important. So, Counselor, can you hear us now?
I don't know if you can hear me or not, but it's saying that my internet is unstable. So
Counselor Pena, I'm sorry. We're going to, yep, that's okay. Julian's going to reach out to you and we'll work on that issue for a moment so we can come back to you. And so last call, counselors, no other questions for Lieutenant Del Greco? I think maybe, no, okay. Lieutenant, we appreciate your attendance. We'll follow up with Mr. Real with any follow-ups and thank you. I know you have some other duties tonight. So thank you for joining us and we'll let you get back to your other work. Hopefully, maybe get some sleep tonight.
Say it again.
Sorry, Council President Davis, councilors, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I hope I get some sleep tonight. We'll see how that goes. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Stay safe. Councilor Borrego, I see you had a question and I have one as well. So I'm going to put you in the queue first. Councilor Borrego, you have a question for the administration? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really have more of a statement or some comments. I was extremely disappointed this morning. I was watching the protest last night on Facebook, and about 9 o'clock, I think I signed off, and I went to bed thinking, oh, it was a peaceful protest. So I was happy to think that that's what happened. And when I woke up this morning, I was very disappointed. I think Councilor Benton talked about balance, and you know, we have a lot of issues that we're dealing with. Our community is very sensitive right now, and the nation is. I mean, with this COVID outbreak, and then Black Lives Matters, and you know, all lives matter. Even our police officers' lives matter. You know, we've had the DOJ in town, and we've been working on use of force, and I don't think we've finished that yet. And then now we're dealing with this. So it's just like stuff on top of stuff. I think I don't think, well, I think maybe there are only a few people that really want violence, but I don't think the majority of people wanted violence from last night's gathering. And I think that some of this goes without saying to the council is that we're all very aware of what's happening. The community is all very aware of what's happening at the national and local level. And, you know, our police officers are employees of the city of Albuquerque. And I think sometimes people forget that. And there's this division of, you know, us versus them. And they've been working hard on community policing. Obviously, we're going to have to work harder. And we're going to have to look for other strategies. Because there's really a healing that's needing to happen, not only in Albuquerque, but in our country. And, you know, I just hope that we can find that balance that Councilor Benton talked about. And, you know, last night, I went to bed thinking, you know, we were making progress by having a peaceful demonstration. And this morning, people who probably weren't even involved in that demonstration were doing things that were unfathomable to our community. And we can't tolerate that. And we also can't tolerate just, the fact that people are, pointing the finger at the police either, because the police are just reacting to, and yes, there has been a history, but if we don't start looking at the future and healing, how can we have hope? And that's something that we need to have. We need to have hope for our communities. So I look forward to meeting with the police and seeing what kind of strategies, and remembering that their hands are tied as well through the DOJ. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. And I'll take that. And Mr. Real, maybe I'll follow up here and we'll hopefully bring this part of this conversation to a close and open up about other stuff. But let me say this. I had the chance to have a conversation with Ms. McGill over at the Black Leadership Council today, and she reminded me of an old organizing saying that I haven't heard in a while, that real change happens when these moments become a movement. And I think that's what we should be building out of this. And that's what we've said we wanted to build for a long time, is a movement. But I have to say, quite frankly, I'm tired of watching, says a former police officer who, I worked in DC for a long time, where we dealt with a lot of protests. We dealt with a lot of these issues. And quite frankly, it was the rising shootings and issues with APD that really convinced me at the end of the day to run for city council 5 years ago now, because I didn't think the old administration was doing what needed to be done. I'm tired of seeing these same moments like Eric Gardner and George Floyd. But in Albuquerque, we've been trying to make space for that change. I appreciate what the mayor said today. Mr. Real, your comments were very particular and poignant and personal today, and I appreciate that. Like, we welcome these protests, and the mayor said this. We welcome protest, we welcome community, we welcome criticism. I want to see fewer politicians, quite frankly, and I want to see more police officers marching and kneeling and talking to community members, and fewer of us. I want to see more of those folks standing up, find a microphone, and fewer of us doing that. But we are not going to let a few agitators employ violence to remedy injustices of violence. And in this city, we absolutely will not. That is a core foundation of what we are trying to do. The damage we're seeing to people and to our communities in the International District and downtown is not Albuquerque. It is not the way we do what we want to do. And it is, quite frankly, not being led by the destruction is not being led by the real community leaders who are working for the right things. And so I want to end there, Mr. Real, by asking this: sort of what are the next steps to capitalize on these moments to build the movement we need again? I know the administration has been talking. I have talked with the chiefs and you and the mayor more in the last couple of days than I have in the last few weeks about these issues. I know there's a new role for we're working through the Office of Equity and Inclusion and the Black Leadership Council and some neighborhood association groups to bring some young men of color together to talk about some of these issues again. So my question are two, can you talk about next steps in terms of dialogue for the community that the administration's moving on? I think that includes the Human Rights Board. And also, if can you give us an update on the mayor's violence interruption project? I know that was something that was highly touted last year as a way to engage our community with police and dealing with these issues. In discussions with our community groups, I understand that project hasn't gotten off the ground yet in the community engagement side, and I wonder what it would take for us to get that in place a little more quickly.
Mr. President and members of the council, thank you for your comments. First and foremost, let me just say that the moment of, if you will, of moving forward is really all about us having the dialogue with the community in a more meaningful manner. As you know, councilors, we established the Office of Equity and Inclusion to begin to have a real heart-to-heart conversation with members of our community that have often felt either not part of what we're trying to get done at the city, or have been left out just entirely because of different approaches to policing in our community throughout the years. The Office of Equity and Inclusion is reaching out to a lot of these groups in our community, and we'll continue to have the conversations about lessons learned particularly from this situation, but also what we can do to create a better communication, if you will, between our public safety department, the APD office, if you will, of our public safety organizations to begin to bolster the community to come out and to be part of the solution. A lot of activity needs to happen. Part of the mayor's, quite frankly, presence yesterday at the Center for Peace and Justice was to have that conversation and to continue to urge our members of our community that felt left out to join us, to think about how we do community policing in a way that involves our neighborhoods, in a way that involves some of these groups that oftentimes their voices aren't heard. And we will continue to do so. I know that today, Ms. Nair and Michelle, our Director of Equity and Inclusion, reached out to some of those members of the community to begin that dialogue and to learn, for example, what is going on tonight. Are they part of this process? What can we do to help make sure that APD does a better job of protecting them, but also how do we do a better job of ensuring that violence is not part of the equation? So we'll continue to do that. I would say you all have a strong voice as well. You all have a lot of contacts with a lot of these the community members, maybe in some ways better than we do in some fashion because of your continuous outreach and your involvement in your respective districts. So having you all be part of that and giving us information about groups out there that feel that they need to be part of the solution is important. As it relates to the violence intervention program, I will have to tell you that I probably would need to have Sarita give you all a briefing on that. She's much more up to speed on that since the APD Police Department reports directly to her, but I will convey the message and have her reach out to you all.
Thanks, Mr. Real. Yeah, and I'm sorry to throw that at you. I realize that's not under your bucket, and it's certainly one we could do for the next meeting. But we had a good presentation, as I recall, at a city council meeting about launching it, and it's probably a good time to get that do a follow-up. So, councilors, at this point, I think we'll call that sort of open floor at this point for any other administration Q&A questions. We're also watching our clock today, but I don't want to cut anybody off. Councilor Harris, I see you have your hand raised, and so we'll go to you and then ask for final Q&A questions for the administration, and then we'll move to the agenda. Councilor Harris.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, and my audio wasn't working at all on my computer, so sorry if I missed if this is already asked and answered. But I heard that there were essentially two protests, one unruly and unlawful, and one that was peaceful and lawful. Tell me, what research or investigation has been done to see if the unruly and unlawful, the violence and the burglary and all that stuff, was that actually organized, and was there some out-of-town influences that kind of caused that to happen? I mean, what do we know about that?
Mr. Real. Mr. Real, we need to take you off. We need to bring your mic back online again.
Are we on now? Can you all hear me?
Go ahead.
Apologize. Mr. President, Councilor Harris, there were two very distinct protests yesterday. One was a very peaceful one that was held up at by the university and was very well attended, and for the most part, people were very sympathetic and gracious with each other, and they marched down Central Avenue all the way to 8th Street. At 8th Street, they had a little, if you will, some folks talked, etc. And then the march moved back up Central towards the university and pretty much dispersed right around 9 or so. No civil unrest. It was all very well done. It wasn't until late in the evening and past 12 o'clock, really, where other groups began to organize different pockets of Central Avenue and started creating a lot of disturbance, if you will, by breaking windows and doing other unlawful activities, including at some point at least some shots were fired, which really created a very unsafe environment. But we don't, and APD is now in the process of reviewing all of the surveillance, all of the video, and touching base with the respective agencies, state police, FBI, and others to get more information as to who and who the members might have been that were part of this group that came out late at night. But now we've seen this happen now twice. We've seen it happen last night and several days ago. Again, it happened after midnight. So there's clearly some agitators that are part of this group. Don't know whether they're from out of town or whether they're from Albuquerque or wherever, but APD is doing some reviews of that and looking at surveillance along with the FBI, and we hope that we'll have a better handle of that situation as the next coming days approach.
Councilor Harris.
Okay. Well, yeah, if you could just keep me informed about what that investigation is, because it is very disconcerting. It sounds like in other cities they did a better job of blending in and co-opting the protests. At least there's a silver lining. It's that it's very clear that this was organized and wasn't, a grassroots effort. It seems like there's some sort of organized effort to break the law and to make Albuquerque look bad and to do damage. And I hope that we pursue those folks and hope some action is taken.
Okay.
Thank you, councilors. Last call for councilors for any other questions for the administration on any topic. Hearing none, we'll move on to Vice President Gibson for the Journal.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll make a motion for approval of the May 18th Journal.
Thank you. And Councilor Bassan has the second. As a reminder, councilors will use our raise the hand button in Zoom just to do that. And thank you, Councilor Bassan, for the second. Seeing no discussion, following the Attorney General's guidance, Ms. Ortega, will you take the roll call vote for the approval of the May 18th Journal?
Councilor Sena?
Yes.
Councilor Benton?
Yes.
Councilor Pena? Xian? I'll put excused. Councilor Bassan?
Yes.
Councilor Borrego?
Yes.
Councilor Davis?
Yes.
Councilor Gibson?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Councilor Harris?
Yeah.
And that carries unanimously with Councilor Pena excused for the moment. Thank you, Ms. Ortega. For communications and introductions, councilors, are there any changes to tonight's letter of introduction? The first I know of, Councilor Borrego and Councilor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of placing R57 on tonight's agenda for final action. R57 is adopting city policy to allow for the establishment of parklets.
Councilor Gibson, I'll take you as the second for that. Councilors, any discussion? Seeing none, we need 2/3 of councilors present to vote in order to place it on tonight's agenda for final action. Ms. Ortega.
Councilor Sena?
Yes.
Councilor Benton?
Yes.
Councilor Pena?
Yes.
Councilor Bassan?
Yes.
Councilor Borrego?
Yes.
Councilor Davis?
Yes.
Councilor Gibson?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Councilor Harris?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, councilors. Councilor Borrego and Gibson, we're back to you on 016.
So, thank you, Counselor. I move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of placing 016 on tonight's agenda for final action. 016 is adopting the temporary outdoor dining ordinance, authorizing temporary amendments to site plans for existing restaurants to allow for outdoor dining for the duration of the current public health emergency, establishing a permit fee.
And Councilor Gibson, I take your second for that as well. I see several others as well. Thank you, councilors. Ms. Ortega, 2/3 of the councilors being present, being required.
Councilor Sena?
Yes.
Councilor Benton?
Yes.
Councilor Pena?
She's a yes.
Okay. Councilor Bassan?
Yes.
Councilor Borrego?
Yes.
Councilor Davis?
Yes.
Councilor Gibson?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Councilor Harris?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, councilors. That carries unanimously. Councilor Benton for R59. Councilor Benton, we're not able to see you or hear you. And so while we're getting him reconnected, I'll make the motion and move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of placing R59 on tonight's agenda for final action. R59 directs the administration to create an active streets initiative to facilitate safe, socially distanced outdoor recreation and active transportation. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councilor Harris. Councilors, any discussion? And we'll work to get Councilor Benton back for that vote. But in the meantime, Ms. Ortega, 2/3 of councilors present, please.
Counselor Senna,
Yes.
Counselor Benton, waiting on him. Counselor Pena, Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Thank you. And that motion passes. Councilor Bassan, 020.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of introducing O20 and placing it on the June 15th council agenda for action. O20 is approving a project involving OBTC Warehouse LLC pursuant to the Local Economic Development Act and City Ordinance to support the operations of OBTC Warehouse LLC, a business operating in Albuquerque, authorizing the execution of a project participating agreement and other documents in connection with the project.
Thank you, Councilor Bassan, and thank you, Councilor Jones, for the second. Councilors, are there any discussion on that item? Seeing none, Ms. Ortega.
Counselor Senna,
Yes.
Counselor Benton, is he on yet? No. Counselor Pena, Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
thank you.
Councilor Bassan, 021.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of introducing O21 and placing it on the June 15th council agenda for action. O21 is approving a project involving Vibrant Corporation pursuant to the Local Economic Development Act and City Ordinance to support the operations of Vibrant Corporation, a business operating project participation agreement and other documents in connection with the project.
Thank you, and Councilor Jones, thank you for that second. Ms. Ortega.
Counselor Senna,
Yes.
Counselor Benton, on yet. Counselor Pena, on yet. Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson, not on. Counselor Jones. Yes. Counselor Harris,
Yes.
thank you.
So next up, we normally have Councilor Pena, but she's working to rejoin us here. And so I'll make the motion that we, go ahead, Councilor Borrego. Did you have a question or are you a second?
Oh, I was going to move the bill, Counselor.
Oh, go ahead if you want to do it for her. Move R64.
Okay, I move that the rules be suspended for the purposes of placing R64 and placing it on the June 15th council agenda. R64 is adjusting fiscal year 2020 appropriations to provide needed equipment to small businesses to implement public health emergency guidelines related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, and I'll second that motion. Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Councilor Bassan, I apologize. I'll come back to your other one as well. Ms. Ortega, will you take the roll call vote on R64?
Yes. Counselor Senna,
Yes.
Counselor Benton, not on yet.
Yes.
Oh, there he is. Okay. Counselor Pena, not yet. Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Got it. 8-0.
Thanks, councilors, and I apologize. We're having some weather issues in the valley. We're happy to have rain, but sometimes that makes this a little harder for folks working from home. So, and Councilor Bassan, I'm sorry, I skipped you on O22. Do you have a motion on that item?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of introducing O22 and placing it on the June 15th council agenda for action. O22 is approving a project involving EAGL Technology Incorporated pursuant to the Local Economic Development Act and City Ordinance to support the rehabilitation and operations of a manufacturing, research and development facility related to gunshot detection systems located in Albuquerque, authorizing the execution of a project participation agreement and other documents in connection with the project.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilor Jones, for the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Ortega for the roll call.
Counselor Senna,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena, Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego.
Yes.
Thank you. Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ortega. I move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of placing EC 78 on tonight's agenda for final action. EC 78 is approval of the first supplemental agreement to add monies to the FY20 outside legal counsel services between Adler Law Firm and the city. And thank you, Counselor Jones, for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Ortega for the roll.
Counselor Sena,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena, Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Counselor Pena, we're taking a vote for immediate action for EC 78. I believe you just joined us. Is that a yes?
Yes. My
Thank you.
son texted me, I think.
That's
It worked.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Thank you, Ms. Ortega. Lastly, I make a move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of pulling ECs number 32, 33, 34, 38, 50, 54, 57, 58, 59, 63, and 77, with apologies to the closed caption technician, out of the Finance and Government Operations Committee and placing them on tonight's agenda for final action. All ECs providing various routine reports to the council. When we get to the consent agenda, councilors, if you have any interest in hearing more about any of these items, you have the opportunity to pull them off consent for discussion, as always. Do I have a second? Thank you, Counselor Jones. Ms. Ortega?
Counselor Sena,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena, yes.
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris. It was a yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, councilors. Any other amendments or changes to the letter of introduction? Seeing none, Counselor Gibson on the letter of introduction as amended.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move approval of the letter of introduction.
And thank you, Counselor Sena, for the second on this one. I'll take that. Ms. Ortega?
Counselor Sena,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris. Thank you.
And that item carries. Thank you, counselors. And reports of committees, there are none tonight. For deferrals and withdrawals, we have a list of these as well, and then we'll get to our action items. We'll begin with Counselor Harris. Looks like we might have lost Counselor Harris for a second, and so I'm going to do it for him. I'll move that we defer EC 436, which is the Tony Sanchez Drive right-of-way vacation, until August 3rd. And Counselor Gibson and Jones for the second. Any discussion? And Counselor Harris, I think you're back with us, or you're okay with that? I think that was going to be your motion. Okay, he consents. So, Ms. Ortega, would you take the vote, please?
Counselor Sena,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Counselor Harris, if you're back with us, do you want to do M1?
Let's see. Let me pass on that because I'm still a little bit disorganized here with everything that's happened with my technology.
That's okay, Counselor. I believe you were going to make a motion to defer item M1, which urges the U.S. Congress to amend the trail system to designate the Route 66 National Historic Trail. I think you were deferring until August 3rd. If that's right, we'll take that.
So we can have our people and your people too, because I think you're co-sponsor on that, Mr. President. So yeah, so we can have people down there who support us. Yeah, move a deferral until August 3rd.
Great. And as a co-sponsor, I'll just second it to make it easy. Ms. Ortega.
Counselor Sena,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, counselors. We appreciate it. Next up is our consent agenda. Counselors, are there any changes to tonight's consent agenda? Going once, going twice. Seeing none. Madam Vice President, you have a motion?
Mr. President, thank you. I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
And a second from Counselor Senna. Thank you, Ms. Ortega.
Counselor Senna,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, counselors. Next up, we have announcements. Counselor Gibson, FGO.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The Finance and Government Operations Committee meeting that was scheduled for Monday, June 8th is canceled.
Thank you. And Counselor Jones, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. There will be a Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee meeting held on Wednesday, June 10th at 3 p.m. via Zoom video conference.
Mr. Chairman, Counselor Benton, if you can hear us.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the rules be suspended. Oops, on the wrong piece. Go back to my.
I believe you had an announcement about the Public Safety Committee meeting on Monday, June 8th.
Yes, the Public Safety Committee meeting scheduled for Monday, June 8th is canceled.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other announcements from counselors? Hearing none, next up would be public hearings. In this matter, it would be AC 20-1. Before I proceed on this item, I want to recognize Counselor Senna, who has an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am recusing myself from this matter as I have prior involvement this issue prior to my position in council.
Thank you, Counselor Senna. And Ms. Ortega, just make a notion that Counselor Senna has recused, and I'll make a motion to defer until August 3rd, the matter of AC 20-1. Seeing Counselor Jones with a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor vote yes. Ms. Ortega, would you call the roll?
Yes. Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego. Yes. Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris. Did we lose?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, counselors. Next up is approvals. Counselor Gibson, EC 74.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to move approval for EC 74, the mayor's recommendation of MRWM Landscape Architects for landscape architectural consultants for Los Altos Park renovation.
Thank you, ma'am. And Counselor Bassan, I'll take yours as the second. Counselor Gibson on the motion, on the bill.
Okay. I just want to read in for the record something. I'd like to thank the DMD and Parks for getting us to this point. You know, we sold the bonds.
Counselor Gibson, we lost your mic just a second. Could you reset it on your side?
Is this better? Nope.
I can hear you, Counselor Gibson.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry. Thank you, ma'am. My apologies.
So I just want to thank both the DMD and Parks and Rec for getting us to this point. We did sell the bonds on these way back in October, and we finally got an RFP out in March or April. It's been so long. Oh, right, in March, because the close date was April 1st. So and so there's been a lot going on. This is a very complicated project with a lot of really large, important parts. But I just want to read into record that part of what's been happening just lately has been some work on Director Montoya's part, which I'm very grateful for. And he has been in contact with Morrow Reardon, and they have agreed to designate Brian Verardo as the project manager for the Los Altos Park renovation. In addition, Mr. Mark Motzko, along with the senior project manager, will assist Mr. Anthony Villanueva for DMD's part in managing this project. All parties have agreed to required public meetings as well as smaller meetings, very important meetings with subject matter experts, which typically include the people who will be main users of these major park elements, like the softball fields and the BMX pump track. So it's very important that those people are consulted with, and we have a plan for that. The last thing I want to say about this is that there was only one responder to this. And for a contract of this magnitude, I think that's problematic. I think that, and I don't think there was any intention at all, but there have been a number of things that have come to light in getting this RFP out and getting the responses back, or response back. And I understand there are some very, very strong laws on this at federal level, and I believe at the state level as well. But that notwithstanding, I believe that there are things that we can do and stay within the confines of the law to encourage more competition in bids of this sort. I think would be good for the city. I think that we would, get a better value for our dollar. Just if there are, more, healthier competition. And again, I'm not laying any blame or anything. It's just a few things that did come up that I would really like for us to look at. So I'm going to be probably working with staff and the DMD, since they're the ones the department that these go through, and looking for ways that we can encourage competition. That's all I have to say. So I do urge your support for this so we can get this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Gibson. Well said. And councilors, any other discussion or comments from the administration? Going once, going twice. Seeing none, the motion on the floor is to approve EC 74. Ms. Ortega, will you take the roll?
Councilor Sena.
Yes.
Councilor Benton.
Yes.
Councilor Pena.
Yes.
Councilor Bassan.
Yes.
Councilor Borrego.
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
Councilor Gibson.
Yes.
Councilor Jones.
Yes.
Councilor Harris.
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. And Councilor Gibson, you're up on the first final action, 013.
Thank you, Mr. President. 013 is amending 12-13-1 of the City Charter, Article 13, Sections 4, 5, 9, and 10 of the City Charter, and various other articles to modify the frequency the Board of Ethics must meet, eliminate the Board of Ethics required report submitted to the mayor and the council, and the need for the board to contract with outside counsel to write advisory opinions, and several other changes. I'll move a do pass.
Thank you. And Councilor Bassan has the second. Thank you very much. And so councilors will clear the board. Any questions on this item, 013, amending the city charter for the Board of Ethics and other items? Going once.
Counselor.
I'm sorry. Mr. Real, I think you have a comment, and then I do believe we have a floor sub as well in the
Yes.
iPad. But
All
Mr.
right.
Real, go ahead before we move that floor sub.
That was my reason for interrupting. I apologize, but wanted to make sure we did the floor sub. And we do need to hold this over till the next council meeting as per the approval process.
Yes, sir. Thank you for reminding me, and our staff on this side all sort of did all the same at once as well. So thank you for everybody keeping me online. Councilor Gibson, I believe you have a floor sub.
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Sorry about that. So I will move the floor sub 4013, which is in your iPads.
And Councilor Benton, I believe you seconded that earlier, if that was right. And so I'll take that one from, there we go. Thank you. Questions on that item? Councilors, any discussion? Seeing none, we need a vote on the floor sub. Ms. Ortega.
Counselor Sena,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
And Mr. President, I'll move deferral on this as substituted to June 15th.
Thank you, ma'am. Seeing no other discussion, and a second from Councilor Bassan, Ms. Ortega for the vote on the deferral till June 15th.
Counselor Sena,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Gibson, you did such a great job on the last one. We'll let you do the next one, R51.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. R51 is approving the First Amendment to the resolution approving the formation of Winrock Town Center Tax Increment Development Districts number 1 and 2. I move a do pass.
And a second from Councilor Jones. Councilors, any discussion on this item for R51? Seeing none, all those in favor vote yes. Ms. Ortega.
Counselor Sena,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Harris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, councilors. Next, we'll go to those councilors from the far northeast parts of the city. Councilors Bassan and Jones, R54.
Thank you, Mr. President. Regarding Resolution 54, urging the New Mexico Department of Regulation and Licensing to provide a method for temporary expansion of liquor service areas for restaurants and bars, establishing policy for the city to similarly authorize such expansions through its local option authority. I move a do pass.
Thank you, ma'am. And I see Councilor Jones as the second. So now back to the councilors for discussion or questions. Councilor Borrego has a question. And so Councilor Bassan, I'll defer if you want to explain the bill first or just go to questions.
Yeah, Mr. President, I'll explain just briefly real quick because just in case that might help. But this is saying that for businesses that do have an existing liquor license, that they can apply for a special use permit, which is something, for example, like with Summerfest, when businesses that already have a liquor license can get this temporary use permit so that they can go to a different location temporarily in order to sell alcohol from their business. So this is saying that they could do that in their parking lot, which kind of goes hand in hand with some of the legislation coming up this evening. And it would authorize, it urges the state to go ahead and it encourages them to say, yes, they will go ahead and offer and approve these permits, the permit applications. And then if that says, you know, if the state does that, it will also then say that the city will go ahead and make sure that these businesses get these temporary permits out so that they can expand their floor print in order to be able to sell alcohol for their premise and their business, hopefully getting more space given the limited circumstances for occupancy. You know, they all have to still abide by the same laws that they did before. This doesn't change any of that, and it would last only through the public health emergency that's been ordered. Councilor Jones or Councilor Borrego, whatever you'd prefer.
And I want to, Councilor Borrego, I saw you removed your hand. I thought maybe you were seconding, but if you had a question, I want to, okay, great, thanks. And then Councilor Jones, do you want to explain or follow up before we go to questions?
I just want to make sure that everyone understood what Councilor Bassan said, and that was this would be subject, of course, to approval from the state, that the city can't do this on their own. So this has been set up very comfortably. So to give the best shot we can at helping some more of these small businesses that are in such dire need of assistance. So thank you, Councilor Bassan.
Thank you, councilors. And I have a question, not seeing any others. I want to go to Mr. Melendrez really quickly on this item. And I know, Mr. Melendrez, you were doing some research on this, but I sort of have two questions, and I just want to be sure. We have another item coming up a little bit later, which is 016, that relates to temporary outdoor dining and expanding the footprint. And so my question, I think, is, would this be necessary if a permitted liquor licensee were to expand their footprint under that other ordinance if we passed it? And number two, if we did create a temporary process or expand the temporary process under R54, those would still have to go through Ms. Montoya and the City Council office through the regular liquor hearing permit process. Is that right?
Mr. President, yes, to answer your first question about the relationship to 016, the city has, its general land use authority applies when a restaurant is talking about where it's going to locate and what area it's going to serve food within. However, when a restaurant also serves liquor, that floor plan within which they are permitted to sell liquor is regulated not only by the city through the city's local option authority, but also by the state of New Mexico Alcohol and Gaming Division under the Regulation and Licensing Department. And that floor plan, that liquor service area, is not always coterminous with the dining area. In many instances, it is, but not always. So to the extent that the city authorizes through its general land use and health safety authority the expansion of a dining floor area, we do not have, as a city, the authority to also contemporaneously expand the liquor service area. That is something that has to be done through the state of New Mexico and through the city's local option authority. And so to answer the second part of your question, the state Alcohol and Gaming Division put out some initial guidance just last week that we received in City Council services. And it is proposing a process to allow these temporary floor area expansions of liquor service areas. And the process that is laid out there is that the city would review those through whatever process it puts in place and send those approvals or not for those floor area expansions to Santa Fe for the Alcohol and Gaming Division to review that and determine whether or not it's appropriate for that floor area expansion as well. So the process that you described going through Donna Montoya, who's the lead staff person in our office for these types of permits, is accurate. The requests would come in and they would be reviewed by the liquor hearing officer with the input from the fire department, the police department, environmental health, and city zoning. And the idea is that those requests would have some overlap with what the city may have already approved as expanded dining areas. And if so, it would give the city an opportunity to hopefully do a little bit of an expedited review to send those up to Santa Fe so that all of the complete dining services can be expanded consistent with the city's goals of authorizing that in response to the COVID limitations.
Thank you. And then, so I want to ask Ms. Yara, just for the record, just to tee her up here, and then we want to move on through this. Ms. Yara, and then I see Council Borrego has a question as well. I don't want to ignore you there. Ms. Yara, as Mr. Melendrez said, these applications would still have to go through the city process, which is managed in the City Council office. Does your staff have the capacity to manage these extra permits? And have you already been working with the state to figure that process out?
Mr. President, yes, actually, Ms. Montoya in our office handles all the liquor licensing, and she has already started working on the process with the state along with Mr. Melendrez. So we're pretty close to having that information that she can use. If these applications become too many of them, we do have other staff capacity, and we can start cross-training other people. So I don't think it's an issue as far as capacity.
Great, thank you. Councilor Borrego.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just wondering if the sponsors of these bills have talked or have looked at how this would impact our DWI issues that we have in the state, and if there's any discussion about that, and whether or not, I mean, I pulled some information just off of the internet, and I find that Bernalillo County and McKinley County have the highest numbers with 33 and 11 respectively. And New Mexico ranks as the 5th in the nation, and that's according to KRQE 5 months ago. So I'm just wondering what your discussion is, or if you know, have any evidence that, you know, this is, and I sympathize with the businesses, but I'm a little concerned, so I need to be convinced a little more, I guess.
I'll throw that back to the sponsors.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you don't mind, Councilor Jones, I'll start. So Councilor Borrego, I think that what you're saying is completely valid, and I have had several discussions. It is something that has been thought of, and I think that the main point is to make sure that it's very clear that this is not to say that people will be able to still get served while in their vehicle. This is just saying that it's expanding the floor print of a business so that if they have 50% occupancy, their parking lot, similar to what's being in your ordinance, would be used, fenced in and used with tents and other safety protocols, with also having, you know, people still needing to get carded, following all the same laws, still being served the same amount that is legal. Nothing's changing in that regard. This is not to say that this is turning into a drive-through service. It's just basically allowing for the liquor service to now be served at these restaurants that are normally serving it inside of their parameters, while still following all of the same rules and regulations from before. I can't hear you, Councilor Borrego.
Councilor Borrego, could you reset your mic on your side?
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we have quite a storm over here on the Northwest Mesa. So the bill, I guess, is urging the state to allow this process. Is that what I'm understanding? And so if we vote on this, all we're doing is recommending to the state legislature, or are we recommending to the Department of Alcohol and Gaming?
So it's two parts, and Mr. Melendrez can maybe clarify it as well, but it's urging the state for approval, which is something that we just, you know, that we've learned that they are already working on. But also then the second part is saying that in the city of Albuquerque, that then the approval will be made, because it's twofold. Am I missing anything key there, Mr. Melendrez?
Mr. President, Councilor Bassan, no, I don't think so. I think that's correct. It's the city shares authority for this decision with the state, and it's urging alcohol and gaming, as you mentioned, and then giving direction to our liquor office, which is housed in City Council, as to what is expected with respect to these. And importantly, the bill articulates that none of the health safety standards within the current liquor control ordinance would be waived with this. It would only be the temporary expansion of a floor plan to correspond with the limits that are being imposed on the normal liquor service area indoors.
But all of the requirements of liquor service would have to be abided by, correct?
Mr. President, Councilor Borrego, yes. As far as the city part of it, the ordinance is clear again that when the liquor hearing officer reviews these, the same health safety considerations would be made as are made for other temporary liquor service areas in the city.
Thank you.
Great. Next up, I see Councilor Jones and then Councilor Sena. So, Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Mr. Melendrez gave me the easiest explanation for all of this. And it says this will not result in a net larger liquor service capacity. It's only allowing more geography because people have to be spaced out. I think that's the number one thing to say right there. It is not going to add more people who can be in the facility. It's only saying that they have to spread out, so we're going to provide tents or whatever to make that possible. I think that's a very simplistic way to say it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilor Senna.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. My questions for the sponsors is really, I know in the other resolutions, there's kind of a layout as to what is the boundaries and guidelines to those areas. So I'm just curious for this resolution, does it really go into mention, will it be a certain fencing off? Because I know during Summerfest events, for example, it's a certain enclosed area, no minors are allowed in that area. There's a lot of restrictions and guidelines. Does this resolution touch on that? And also, does it, provide those guidelines to businesses if they do want to expand? And is there a sunset as to say that this ends as soon as we are over the public health emergency?
Yes, Mr. President and Councilor Senna, the easiest one in that is that there is a sunset. It is stated in the resolution that this is for during the public health emergency order. And as far as the same kind of parameters that were introduced in the other upcoming resolution and ordinance, this is one that says that they can tent in, they can go ahead and fence off, but it also has to be in conjunction with what planning recommends and what they are allowing as well, with making sure that they're not just fencing off the entire parking lot so that people can't still have somewhere to be, but it's following all of the other guidelines that already exist. And again, Mr. Melendres, if you don't mind, if I missed anything with details with that, I would be grateful for you to clarify.
Mr. President, Councilor Bassan, I think I would only just point back to the city's liquor control ordinance, and that has a test in it for what's appropriate for a liquor service area that would be applied to this. And the way that is determined is based on an evaluation by various city departments, including the Albuquerque Police Department, the Albuquerque Fire Department, the Environmental Health Department, and the Planning Department. So amongst those, if any of those review entities were to make a determination that because of fire capacity, because of exits, because of parking requirements, because of other health safety issues, that a proposed service area was too large, then that would impact the outcome and would likely result in a denial of the permit. With respect to termination, this resolution does say that this concept would end when the occupancy limitations under the public health emergency end. But perhaps more forceful, the guidance that the state of New Mexico put out sets a sunset on these types of approvals for October 31st. So it's a firm date. And unless that is amended by the state, regardless of what the city does, they would terminate hard on that day.
Thank you. And next up, well, I see Councilor Gibson and then Councilor Borrego, and then we want to go back to the sponsors to try to close because we have a number of other items and related to this, and we still want to watch our 7 o'clock time plan if we can. So we'll go to Councilor Gibson first and then Councilor Borrego. Councilor Gibson, could you activate your mic on your side, please?
I should have learned this by now. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to say that I really like this. I think that this is this goes really well with what we're trying to do in giving restaurants an opportunity to expand their dining area and to carry the experience that they would have had, sitting indoors and outside, in an area that they're controlling. So I will enthusiastically support this. Also, I just want to make one observation that Councilor Jones is actually sponsoring a bill that starts urging. I don't think I've ever seen that happen before. So congratulations for that. Thank you.
These are special times indeed. Councilor Borrego, did you have a follow-up here? Are you
okay? So my follow-up question, and maybe this is for Chris. So are we, by doing this, are we preempting the state in what they're doing in terms of trying to they're already working on this. So I'm just wondering or we're just urging them to continue that, or are we prompting them?
Mr. President, Councilor Borrego, no, as a technical matter, the city really doesn't have the authority, first of all, to preempt the state, not in this regard. But the Liquor Office of City Council Services Department has been working and does work really closely with the Alcohol and Gaming Division. And those two agencies have been in contact over this issue quite a bit over the past few weeks. And so I think from what I've observed, there appears to be a lot of joint effort and maybe sort of some symbiotic kind of momentum there. I think that the state, after this resolution was introduced, the Alcohol and Gaming Division did come out with its initial guidance, and it appears completely consistent with what this resolution is urging. And so I don't think that, it can't make that department do anything, but to the extent it's of any value for the city to say that it concurs with what they're doing, that's helpful, I think, if that's the policy wish of the council, and also to give your liquor hearing officer some guidance on what your expectation is on how to treat these. And those are the two things that this resolution would do.
And the reason I asked the question, Councilor Bassan and Councilor Jones, is I have a liquor license certification, and I just want to be sure that what we're doing is following the rules within the existing guidelines of the state, and that we're not, sort of jumping the gun in terms of what they're already trying to do. And so that's why I asked the questions.
Thank you, Councilor. I see Councilor Harris, and then we want to go back to the sponsors to close. Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. And one question I have is, it's great if we have these great intentions. It's great if we pass it today and if the mayor signs it tomorrow. That's all fine and good. The concern I have is that the sort of the inertia, the bureaucratic inertia of the city. These restaurants have been closed for going on 3 months now. And if we're going to give them something that could inject some hope and inject some life, and it's going to take a 2-month process of going through a hearing. One of the words I heard Mr. Melendra said, which made me become very kind of frightened about all this, the liquor license hearing officer. Well, that's really nice. So we're going to pass this wonderful resolution, and then we're going to bog them down in red tape and liquor license hearing officers and applications and fees and all this junk. So how quickly can we expedite these things and the emergency powers that we gave the mayor? How quickly can we have our liquor license hearing officer hear these things? Can we do expedited hearings? Because frankly, just to be blunt, I think this resolution will be worthless if bureaucratic red tape kills it.
Mr. President, I think I can offer a couple of comments that may be relevant to Councilor Harris's comments. So the city liquor hearing officer does hold hearings for some licenses, for permanent licenses, for permanent floor plan expansions, for what are traditionally known as special dispenser permits, which this resolution is analogous to. Those types of approvals do not require hearings, and they're actually relatively expedited and relatively affordable. Whereas a full liquor license to serve, liquor for perpetuity at a location does require quite a bit of process. A temporary approval is not quite as much. And so that's, I think, one of the important aspects with respect to the sunset of this is its temporary nature. And because of the temporary nature, if the council were to pass this and determine that this is a good idea, these would be handled pursuant to the rules for temporary authorizations for liquor service. And again, those are relatively expedited. Our office can usually turn those out in just a few days. They do not require a hearing or even an appearance before the liquor hearing officer. The process is that the city would receive a request. I've spoke with our staff earlier just today for a process to receive those requests. Once those requests are received, they are routed simultaneously to the various departments, including AFR, APD, zoning, and environmental health. There are staff members in those offices who are used to receiving these and understand that they are somewhat time sensitive. I think, again, with respect to the 16 ordinance, which all of those groups are also going to be reviewing. Hopefully that will build capacity for those groups with respect to these individual requests so that they'll be ready to review and make a quick determination as to whether or not they have any safety issues. But those can turn around pretty quickly. Once those comments are gathered, the hearing officer is notified that those comments have come back, and to the extent that they are all approvals, then it requires just a simple signature from the hearing officer, and that happens through accumulation of these and a distribution of those to the hearing officer for a signature. That process, takes just a few minutes of review for each document. So it would not be a particularly long review. I think the nice thing about this approach is that it follows a pathway that is already somewhat established, although these are unique circumstances that it's being applied to.
One more thing. Yes. Now, would it be helpful or possible to amend this ordinance so that it's also governed by the Emergency Procedures Act that we gave the mayor expanded powers to kind of get these things through if something gets kind of bogged down someplace?
Mr. President, so Councilor Harris, so to the extent that the council wanted to delegate the authority under its local option authority to the mayor under the Emergency Procedures Civil Emergencies Ordinance that the council recently did, that's something that I think could be discussed. However, this resolution would simply just take advantage of the city council's current processes for these, and this process has always been housed within city council in order to make these types of determinations. So I think it'd be a little bit unprecedented for the council to delegate its local option authority. That is something that is exclusively held within the authority of the governing body, but that is something that could probably be looked into further.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's anything that we can do to, you use some things which, and you're giving us good advice, and you use things like a relatively, streamlined process, language like that, which in these times, relatively streamlined could be a week or two in ordinary circumstances. So I don't know how we ensure that this really does, that these restaurants really can get something turned around in a day or two. I don't know how we guarantee that if there's any way to do it.
Mr. President, Councilor Harris, I think the time issue, I think, involves largely in how quickly the various city departments can review. So this resolution doesn't particularly urge, zoning and et cetera to have an expedited time frame. I do get the sense that a lot of these departments are pulling in the same direction under the administration's guidance to act quickly with respect to these issues because of the economic implications. But perhaps some encouragement from councilors to the administration to get those reviews done quickly would be a good place to expedite.
Thank you.
All right. And so, Councilors Jones and Bassan, I think we're back to you for the close on this item. Wait, Councilor Borrego, I see you one more time, but I want to remind us we got to be quick about this. We've got a couple of other items, including yours, we need to get to before 7. Councilor Borrego? Councilor Borrego, would you activate your mic on your side?
I have another question that's really important. And so I have, and we all have probably, places that serve only alcohol and places that serve alcohol and food. So is there any distinction regarding that in the approval process?
Mr. President, Councilor Borrego, I do want to just make sure to be clear that as of right now, bars aren't even allowed to open. It's restaurants and bars. So, until the governor decides to go ahead and open that up as well, then that's not really only what we're talking about. But in addition to that, this is, again, still expanding the space. And I think that that's going to help make people feel safer too, right? I mean, they're not going to want to be in tight quarters or, go to somewhere else if they can actually enjoy having a meal and a beverage, or even just a beverage after wanting to get out of the house, following all the same laws as before, but being able to socially distance properly according to the regulations and the order from the state.
Thank you. Councilor Bassan, if it's okay, we'll take that as a close, and I'll let Councilor Jones, if she has any additional, or if you have any additional, we'll let you close.
I do have just a couple other things I do want to add as a close. Thank you, Mr. President. So I just want to make sure to point out again that the state, this is saying that we're urging the state, if they say yes to these special dispenser permits, then the city needs to decide at that point if they want to approve them or not. And this would be telling them, the license hearing officer, to say it's okay to go ahead and authorize these, which would therefore expedite the process for all of these businesses. If we, leave it up to some discretion, I think that could take more time for them. And right now, even if it's 2 days to get approved, 2 days is better than no days, as far as being able to make sure that this can get passed and to be able to, again, have some more opportunity for our public, for these businesses, for the safety and well-being of people, while also, again, expanding the geography. We're not saying we're expanding and encouraging more consumption. This is to go along with the other stuff as well that is coming up on our agenda. But we're essentially, I feel like we're crossing some T's and dotting some I's as far as regulation and helping streamline that process during a point where time is of the essence for everybody. And I think this could really help for all of them in a safe and legal way.
Thank you. Councilor Jones? Great. Seeing no other discussion on that item, Ms. Ortega, would you take the roll on item R54?
Councilor Sena?
Yes.
Councilor Benton?
Yes.
Councilor Pena?
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Bassan?
Yes.
Councilor Borrego?
Yes.
Councilor Davis?
Yes.
Councilor Gibson?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Councilor Harris?
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you, councilors. Next up, we have Councilors Borrego and Gibson on R57. I believe you have an amendment as well. Sponsors, I'll let you decide who goes first.
Thank you, Councilor. Let's see, let me get my bearings straight here. So R57 is adopting city policy to allow for the establishments of parklets. And I think everyone has the description of what a parklet is. And this particular bill is taking the definition of parklet out of the DPM, which is the Development Process Manual, and allowing basically retail to expand kind of similarly to what Councilor Bassan is doing in the previous bill, to come in for a permit process. They were already working on this, and so we just took that section out, and it allows retail businesses to expand with the approval of a site plan. And I also have an amendment on this one, and let me find my notes here, and I'll tell you what it is.
And Councilor, before we take your amendment, let's take the motion and get a second on your original motion to approve R57.
So I
I see
move-
Councilor
move-
Gibson. And so now back to Councilor Borrego for the amendment.
Okay, so the amendment to this bill is regarding permit fees and eliminating those fees. We had talked about a $20 fee, and then we decided that, we should, during COVID, we should just eliminate the fee.
And so the motion for the amendment number 1, and do we have a second from Councilor Gibson as the co-sponsor? Councilors, any discussion on the amendment as offered by Councilors Borrego and Gibson? Councilor Bassan.
Thank you, Mr. President and councilors. The one thing when I was reading this was the $20 permit fee that, it just kind of seemed like a sting. And then at the same time, it is nominal in some ways. So I appreciate the amendment, and I really appreciate this bill.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other discussion on the amendment as offered? Seeing none, Ms. Ortega to call the roll on amendment number 1.
Councilor Sena?
Yes.
Councilor Benton?
Yes.
Councilor Pena?
Yes.
Councilor Bassan?
Yes.
Councilor Borrego?
Yes.
Councilor Davis?
Yes.
Councilor Gibson?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Councilor Harris?
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you. And Councilors Gibson and Borrego back on your bill. Anything further on the underlying bill as amended?
I think that this would help our small businesses, and I don't know if Councilor Gibson has anything else she'd like to add.
Yes, actually, that I'm really happy to be co-sponsoring with you on this, Councilor Borrego. I think that both of these, the resolution and the ordinance that we'll be looking at next are not only going to help small businesses and restaurants get back into business again, but it's really going to, I think, start to normalize as much as we can anyway, our just day-to-day life here in Albuquerque. So I'm happy to be on this.
I'm sorry, Counselor, I stepped on you. Thank you very much. Counselor, seeing no other discussion on that item, Ms. Ortega, would you call the roll on R57 as amended?
Counselor Sena?
Yes.
Counselor Benton?
Yes.
Counselor Pena?
Yes.
Counselor Bassan?
Yes.
Counselor Borrego?
Yes.
Counselor Davis?
Yes.
Counselor Gibson?
Yes.
Counselor Jones?
Yes.
Counselor Harris?
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. Counselors, we're back up. Congratulations on that one. And we'll turn it over to you to do it again on 016, Borrego and Gibson.
Thank you, councilors. This particular bill, 016, is adopting temporary outdoor dining ordinance authorizing temporary amendments to site plans for existing restaurants to allow for outdoor dining for the duration of COVID, public health emergency, establishing permitting fees. And actually, I have an amendment on that one also, Mr. President, to eliminate the permit fees. And so the previous bill was regarding retail space, and this one is regarding restaurants.
Thank you. And I see a second from Counselor Gibson on, on 016. And just to clarify, Counselor Borrego, your motion is a do pass of 016 as an emergency ordinance, if I recall. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. And Counselor Gibson, thank you for that second. Is it okay with the sponsors if we take questions first? I see Counselor Harris has a question, or would you, Counselor Gibson, like to go ahead first?
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Counselor Harris.
I have a question. Since and I think it's a good idea to waive the permit fees, but the cost of these investigations and the inspections and so forth, I just want to perhaps ask the administration if they could account for that and put that on the COVID federal funding.
Can I address that, Mr. President?
Go ahead.
Both bills refer to COVID. And so if there are fees or administrative costs that we can recoup, I think that because of, and I did talk with Sanjay today, and he may want to comment if he's around, or maybe Mr. Rael, but both bills refer to the COVID duration, which would allow us to at least look at whether we could recoup those fees.
Mr. President and Councilor Harris, I think the Councilor Borrego is correct. Under the economic impact of COVID, I think the additional costs could be attributed to the CARES Act. The only other question that might be of relevance here is just how do we define the end of COVID? Simply because none of us know what that is. But that's something that we'll have to discuss down the road, because obviously we're still right in the middle of it, and not knowing when it ends may be a challenge. But otherwise, the amendment that I think that the councilors put forward is okay with us.
Great. Thank you. Counselor Harris, does that answer your question sufficiently? Great. I see Counselor Bassan has a question, and then I want to go to Counselor Gibson, who has an amendment that's available and needs to be passed as well. But Counselor Bassan, go ahead with your question. Counselor Bassan, we'll ask you to take your mic off on your end. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Given what Counselor Harris asked, and then what Mr. Rael's answer was, would it make sense to change it for the duration of the public health emergency this time?
Mr. Rael, do you have a preference?
Mr. President, and Councilor Bassan, they may be two different things, right? The public emergency may be terminated, and we may still be dealing with COVID. So it really is the council's pleasure. I would suspect that given the nature of this work and the amount of time that it will take, that it may be better to leave it as when COVID ends and we come to the council with a policy to change it whenever we all believe that's appropriate, because the emergency could maybe be, managed, and the governor's emergency order could be rescinded, but we'd still be in some application of this and helping the businesses. So it's a bit of a pro-business bill. So I would probably not. It'd be up to the council to make that determination.
I think Councilor Gibson may have an amendment here that might help it, that we might use to address this as well. But Councilor Bassan, do you have any follow-up there, or do you just want to see where the conversation goes? Okay.
Well, also I was going to mention that Miss Morris is here, and I think she studied that. So we might want to hear from her first, if that would be okay, Mr. President.
We do have Ms. Morris here, and so absolutely. Ms. Morris, do you want to address that really quickly before we move to the amendment?
Mr. Chair, councillors, yes. So the bill as drafted references the public health emergency and defines it as the orders being in place about social distancing. It does also have authority in there for either the city to terminate early or the orders to be ended, and so it really is at the direction of the city to choose when this would be ended. The outdoor dining language involves the bill involves the provision of an existing site plan so that it's clear what is going on the site prior to this, as well as a process in which to undo it when we decide such time that these outdoor dining spaces are no longer appropriate or necessary. Does that answer the question to a certain degree? The bill also, with the amendment, proposes to bring the fees down to zero, and that would be for the lifetime that this bill is in place as currently drafted.
Councilor Bassan, does that answer your question for now?
Yeah, Mr. President, it answers my question. My only hesitation with all of it is just, I think the natural worry that anything just slips through the cracks and gets forgotten about, for making sure that and I doubt it will happen, but it's my only inclination with that is if we just don't terminate it in a timely fashion when it's necessary.
Great. Councilor Borrego, I see you had a question, and then I want to go back to the sponsors for their amendment. Nope, she's passing. So we'll go back to Councilor Gibson. I believe you have an amendment in the iPads.
I do. This is for amendment number 1, I guess, to O-2016. And it's quite a long one. There's a lot of small word changes in here, but I will go to the explanation if that would be all right. This amendment makes minor technical changes to improve the implementation of the bill. The edits are from the planning department. The edits include revising it from the planning department to the city for inspections. In some instances, the fire department has been conducting relevant inspections. This revision gives the administration flexibility on assigning the inspection work. The amendment also proposes no fee for the permit. In order to charge the proposed $20 fee for the temporary outdoor dining area, the planning department case tracking and permitting system will have to be modified. Planning has been through this before when they took on the business registration duties, and it cost several $1,000s to accomplish. They don't have a current quote from the vendor on how much it would cost to modify the system, and they also don't know how long it would take them to schedule the work. Knowing that the TODA is intended to be momentary, planning recommends that the fee be reduced to 0.
Thank you, Councilor. And Councilor Borrego, is that a second on the amendment? Great, thank you. We'll take that. we'll clear the board of hands. Councilors, any questions about the amendment on floor amendment number 1? Seeing none, Ms. Ortega, would you take the roll call vote on approving floor amendment number 1? And for councilors who are jumping back in with technical issues, we are on 016 and approving floor amendment number 1.
Counselor Sena?
Yes.
Counselor Benton? Yes. Counselor Pena?
Yes.
Counselor Bassan?
Yes.
Counselor Borrego? Counselor Davis?
Yes.
Counselor Gibson?
Yes.
Counselor Jones?
Yes.
Counselor Harris?
Yes.
Thank you. Passes unanimously.
Thank you all. That item carries unanimously for the amendment. Councilors, as a reminder, let's see, we are back on 016 as amended. If there are any questions, please raise your hand. And if the administration wants to follow up any, we'll take yours as well. Otherwise, we will go back to the sponsors for close, and we'll try to do this while we have everybody reconnected before the next thunderstorm hits and kicks everybody back off again. To the sponsors to close, I think.
Urge your support.
Councilor Gibson says ditto. Ms. Ortega.
Counselor Sena?
Yes.
Counselor Benton?
Yes.
Counselor Pena?
Yes.
Counselor Bassan?
Yes.
Counselor Borrego? Counselor Davis?
Yes.
Counselor Gibson?
Yes.
Counselor Jones?
Yes.
Counselor Harris?
Yes.
That passes unanimously as amended.
Thank you all. We appreciate that, and thanks everybody for working through those tech issues. We know that the internet doesn't always work in Albuquerque when it rains, but it doesn't rain very often. Councilor Ben, R59.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll move a due pass on R59, directing the administration to create an active streets initiative, safe, socially distanced outdoor recreation, and active transportation opportunities on neighborhood streets during health emergencies.
And do we have a second? Thank you, Councilor Gibson, for the second. Councilors, any discussion on any questions for this item? And Councilor Benton to explain the bill and maybe to close.
Yes, very quickly, Mr. President, and I appreciate the administration's looking at this. If you've been following the news around the country, specifically some of the larger cities, they have been doing some of these limited closures to just help people get out. You know, a lot of people are out trying to get some exercise while maintaining social distance. If you go out on the Bosque Trail right now, I'd say it's questionable as to what the social distancing is, just by the sheer number of people on the trail, even if you're on a bicycle. So it's an attempt to expand only during the emergency, the ability to close only local streets and collectors, nothing above that classification. We had some discussions with DMD about how expensive these closures can be. But we also feel like because we're responding to the COVID emergency, that they would qualify for the funding that we received under the CARES Act. So I appreciate that. I appreciate their thinking on that. But the other aspect of the issue is a lot of our public streets under the current circumstances are really being used for another kind of recreation, which I would call motorized recreation, including street racing, exhibition driving, noise making. There might be some opportunities here to maybe put a dent into that and discourage some of that as well. And the bill calls for us to talk to neighborhood associations. I think this would be where counselors can come in to get the word out to their neighborhood associations to ask for suggestions as to places that would be appropriate for such closures. We don't see it being anything super widespread, but it seems like it would be a good tool right now during this emergency. So open to any questions, but there's the thunder outside. Thank goodness for rain.
Thank you. And I'll take a privilege and then I'll see Councilor Borrego for the question. But Councilor, I appreciate you bringing this up. I think this is a great idea. We've seen this in other cities trying to figure out how to innovate and make them more attractive. I have to say, we've been talking to the folks at the Harvard Bricklight District by UNM about possibly using that as a demonstration site. I think there's a lot of local merchants there that would love to use that. Our Brick Light Nights activities during the summer have already sort of done that on a temporary basis. This would be great. I think of all the things on the agenda tonight, this is the one I got the most email and input about, was the idea of opening up streets for more activity, especially now. So I appreciate you working on this, and I really appreciate the administration. I know Mr. Montoya and his folks really worked hard to figure out how you might implement this, and it is not always easy to get the city to agree to do something different on the fly, but y'all did it, and I appreciate it. Councilor Borrego, I see you have a question.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. And I just want to commend Councilor Benton for pushing this forward. It was one of the recommendations in M20-2. So it's good to see that we're following suit, and we're looking at issues and safe ways to, keep our distance and keep people in their communities. And I really do appreciate that.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilors, any other questions or any comment from the administration? We've already said nice things about you, but I see Mr. Rail is raising his hand. So, but take it while it's good, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. President and councilors, we like this bill as well. We think it's a good use of the public right of way, but we'd like to ask if whether or not you all could limit Councilor Benton to only one street bill a year.
I think our staff gave us some comments about that back here as well. So. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Councilors, any other discussion, or Councilor Benton to close?
Urge your support, councilors.
Thank you. Ms. Ortega?
Councilor Sena?
Yes.
Councilor Benton?
Yes.
Councilor Pena?
Yes.
Councilor Basan?
Yes.
Councilor Borrego?
Yes.
Councilor Davis?
Yes.
Councilor Gibson?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Councilor Harris?
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you, councilors. And next up, our last item of business for the evening is approval of our final committee appointments. I move approval. And I need a second somewhere.
Second.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Councilors, those committee assignments are available in your iPad and we're part of the agenda. Ms. Ortega, would you call the roll, please?
Councilor Sena?
Yes.
Councilor Benton?
Yes.
Councilor Pena?
Yes.
Councilor Basan?
Yes.
Councilor Borrego?
Yes.
Councilor Davis?
Yes.
Councilor Gibson?
Yes.
Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Councilor Harris?
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you all, and a special thanks this evening to our staff with Julie and Crystal and Ms. Yara for helping us figure this out, and the staff of Cultural Services and IT who helped us figure out sort of on the fly of how to make our secure remote location work out this evening for our folks that have essential staff that have to be here to run these meetings. We really appreciate Dr. Sanchez and her team for helping us do that. There being no further business, this city council meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.